Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Friends of Recovery New York Day of Action, Harm Reduction Day of Action. I am Dr. Angelia Smith Wolfson, and I am so very pleased that you are able to join us today. We use the Day of Action as a statewide advocacy tool to bring information to the recovery community about relevant topics. And our past Day of Actions have included discussing recovery housing. As one of the issues. So we are very excited today to bring you a great lineup of informed speakers who will be imparting their knowledge with you regarding harm reduction and what is this? What is it all about? And how can the recovery community be more informed about harm reduction? So without further ado, I have the honor of introducing someone who is certainly not needs no real introduction to the recovery community. She has been our commissioner of the New York State Oasis for 259 days, and I am counting. Yes, because I am so excited. I get more excited every time. I have an opportunity to work with her, to hear from her, so that she can share her vision. She is right off the heels of the New York State Harm Reduction Conference, where although I didn't see her in person, I did witness her virtual keynote, and it was beyond amazing and dynamic. So without further ado, I give you Commissioner Cunningham from the New York State Office of Addiction Support Services. Dr. Cunningham.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith Wilson. And I'm very happy to be here today to participate in today's Harm Reduction Day of Action. So, before becoming commissioner, harm reduction was really a huge part of my work for 20 years. I worked very closely with several community-based harm reduction organizations throughout my career. And so this is really great for me to be able to share today with you. Also, I'm really proud that at OASAS, that this is really, harm reduction is a priority for me and for the agency, and certainly part of my vision and guiding principles at the agency. So I definitely want to applaud for New York for hosting the Harm Reduction Day of Action. And, this is more important now than ever before. As you all know, we are at the worst overdose crisis ever in this country. And for that reason, it's absolutely critical that we embrace harm reduction and that we focus on really keeping people alive. And we do that, through harm reduction strategies by meeting people where they are, by providing respectful and non-judgmental services, and really with the focus of moving people to a healthier place, and really focusing on individual goals, and overall health and whatever that may mean for people. So I just want to touch on some of the things that we're doing in terms of embracing harm reduction at OASAS. So I'm really excited that we are in the process of developing a new division of harm reduction so that we will have prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. It's sort of the fourth, leg on the stool. We also, are ensuring that in our certified programs that we use appropriate language, that's person-first language and judgmental and respectful language that's not stigmatizing. We're providing opportunities for more education and training on harm reduction. We're investing in fentanyl test strips, right? So this is certainly an important part of the harm reduction sort of supplies and toolkits, so that people can know what's in their substance and can change behaviors accordingly. We're also expanding overdose prevention kits with naloxone and safety kits, all with the goal of helping people stay healthy and stay alive. we are, I was really excited also to hear Commissioner Bassett from the Department of Health talk about expanding the naloxone standing order. And so we are also very much working with pharmacies in order to, make sure that they carry and dispense naloxone without a prescription. And then there are other things like we're doing much more street outreach. So right now in New York City, but planning to expand across the state, we're working with our sister agency on subway outreach as well in New York City. We are planning public awareness campaigns so that people, again, know the risk of fentanyl and overdose death. And then working with the quote unquote don't use alone hotline so that if people are alone, that they can call a hotline and that, and if something happens and they become unresponsive, that there's ways to then somebody on the line can call 911 and can make sure that the overdose is not fatal. So these are some examples of the things that we're doing. We have guidance documents that we're working with that really embed harm reduction. So, our urine drug screening testing, we have new guidance there. We have new guidance on reducing overdose risk and suicide risk. We also have new guidance on prescribing buprenorphine. Again, all embracing harm reduction strategies and principles. And then we have many, many trainings. So we've done a series of town halls with providers. One of our town halls that focus on harm reduction had over 500 participants. So clearly a lot of interest in here. We have office hours that are occurring monthly. We have a training in a box. And so a lot of ways to get training around harm reduction and really think about how to implement harm reduction strategies and principles in services. And then finally, I just want to touch on some of the recovery specific initiatives that we're involved in. Clearly, recovery supports are critical for OASS and our system of care. We have our recovery centers that we support and our youth clubhouses that we support. And we're also continuing to expand in other areas. Certainly transportation is a huge part, right? So that people can access services and reduce their barriers to care. Transitional housing is another big part, of supporting recovery. And that's a new initiative where we're having, over 200 transitional housing slots. And then also really important is the recovery housing or the sober housing, bringing those services in under the OASS umbrella to make sure that there's clear standards in which we're providing, sort of recovery housing. And so that is a new process where we will be voluntarily certifying these sober homes and really bringing them into the field to ensure that they're safe and that there's a clear standard of care. So that's just some of the work that we're doing at OASS to really embrace harm reduction and continue to expand our support of recovery services. So thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm really it's just wonderful to see how for New York and the recovery community is embracing harm reduction. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. We appreciate all of the work that you've done so far. And I mentioned in your 259 days in office. And I know we look forward to the work that is going to be coming. And I just want to personally thank you for being brave. Last week's keynote at the Evergreen Harm Reduction Conference was very, very brave. I was just moved. I was moved. And I was so glad that you shared your beautiful daughters with us. And I was so glad that you provided a little bit about you and your work. And that has been going on for decades in this field. And I appreciated it. So I look forward to all of the work that will come from the New York State OASS Harm Reduction Office. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And now, one of the things that we do with our Day of Action is that this is never a for New York alone event. It is always an organization that has nudged for New York to begin to bring these issues to the forefront. So, our very own New York State Alumni Association is our partnering organization on this Day of Action. And now I want to bring up the chair of the steering committee so that he can bring greetings on behalf of the New York State Alumni Association for the Harm Reduction Day. Albert?
Thank you, Dr. Angelia, and thank you, Dr. Cunningham. Um, it's a great pleasure to be here today. I feel honored speaking on behalf of the Alumni Association of New York State, and I am living proof that harm reduction works. I'm a person who's in long-term recovery. Thanks to my pathway was MAT and abstinence-based programs. But in MAT, I was on methadone for 5 years, and there was where I learned about the disease of addiction, and how I could arrest it. And I have moved forward thanks to Oasis. We started the Alumni Association about 12 years ago, and it's funny because it was in a September, the recovery month. Um, I wouldn't be here today without the help of you guys. And when I say you guys, is Oasis, the OHMH, ASAP. Thanks to the New York Credentialing Board, I am now, because I had a career change. I went from a KSAC, now I'm a SERPA. I am the supervisor for peer services at Samaritan Daytop Village, or the outpatient program. I work at the Richard Press Wellness Center, and we have the recovery center on the second floor. So everybody, you're welcome to stop by, and if you do stop by the recovery center, come up to the fifth floor where and pay me a visit. I could show you around, and we could chat for a while. Um, I am very big with harm reduction because I know for a fact that it does work. You know? And once again, thank you all for letting me share.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Albert. For those of you who don't quite know that last year, Friends of Recovery in New York and the New York State Alumni Association made our relationship kind of formal. I think we got married, Albert. I think we got married, right? For New York and the New York State Alumni Association. Became an integrated partnership, a family where we support each other, and the New York State Alumni Association is now a supportive partner and kind of an arm of an extension of what of the For New York family. So we are so pleased and just excited to move forward with the Alumni Association. There are going to be so many new things coming down the pathway, so we're just so excited. Albert, do you want to, we have a little bit of time, do you want to give a little shout out to the peer conference that will be coming in December?
Yes, I do believe it is. I don't know exactly what date. If I'm not mistaken, it's December 2nd, around there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We started this with at the Silverstein Hunter College on 120th Street. It was a city thing because it was all the programs, all the peers and all the programs from the city. But now we have expanded, and this year we're doing it virtually, and with the help of For New York, of course, which I'm so excited that and I'm so excited not only that we're partnered with For New York, but I'm excited because I'm on the board, So like, wow, something big.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that, where I was to where I'm at now. And anyway, the peer conference, yeah, we're going to be sharing a lot of things. We got a lot of um, subject matter experts, that are going to be presenting. So, like I said, we're going national now. Not only statewide, but we're national. We inviting everybody to come on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we look forward to it, and being able to support the Alumni Association in this endeavor. Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Angelia.
So now in our program, we want to, before we bring up the next set of speakers, I want to introduce you to our, he probably needs no introduction, Mr. Ben Riker, who is our Director of Advocacy and Policy. And, okay, I'm getting word. We're changing shifts. Okay, so Ben will be coming up right after. The dynamic duo is what I'm calling them. So, without further ado, we have a special treat for you. We have a discussion, a dialogue that will be happening between Dr. Felicia Pullen, who is the executive director of the Pillars in Harlem, and Miss Tracy Gardner, who is the senior vice president of policy and advocacy at the Legal Action Center in New York. And these two ladies will engage in a conversation about harm reduction and the connection to the recovery community. So without further ado, if we're able to bring them up, and then right after these ladies, you will be hearing from Ben Riker, who is our policy director. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Angelia. Thanks for the introduction. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank For New York for creating this space. I think it's so important for us to converse, not only about the importance of harm reduction, but as you said, Dr. Smith-Wilson, the coexistence of harm reduction and the recovery centers to support people who are still using. So this is a very exciting time for us to be here and to come together. Hi, Tracy Gardner, how are you?
I'm good, Dr. Pullen. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties in arriving late. I was wondering, since we can't actually talk to one another because of the technology of StreamYard, I was hoping you could open and I could be a respondent to your overview.
Absolutely. So, I'm really honored to be here, not only to represent some of the recovery centers around the city, but to share this platform with you, with Dr. Smith-Wilson and the commissioner and all of the other visionaries and thought leaders that are here. Because as the commissioner said, we're experiencing some of the worst overdoses and the crisis that we've seen in New York. And what I really hope that we can get to is, how health equity research and political determinants of health are informing, right, in the form of structural racism, are informing some of what we are seeing in terms of the overdose rates, specifically among people of color in New York City. And so, for example, Tracy, and then I'm going to bat this to you. For example, compared to whites in New York City, Blacks are historically more likely to be racially segregated, to live in communities that are 100% below the federal poverty line, dealing with homelessness, housing insecurity, uninsured, underinsured, impacted by mass incarceration. And I think that it's important for us to have the opportunity to talk about how that structural racism is impacting overdose rates and use in New York, and how we can talk about the coexistence of harm reduction and recovery.
So this is obviously a big focus for discussion as the rates, and we talked about this as we were preparing, the rates of the death rate among particularly Black and Indigenous people in this country, from overdose. And that's the issue. Overdose is happening, but the people dying from it are Black and Indigenous. And I think that that's noteworthy because these are two populations, and obviously these are populations in New York as well, that have been subjected to public policies of oppression, right? I love that political determinants that you talk about, because it really is more true to the term of social determinants of health. The social is the political, and the determinants that inform the health that in general is impacted by so many other kind of oppressive systems that's the whole picture. It's the same discussion that we have about what does harm reduction offer communities that have been historically under-resourced, historically have less political power, and have been the focus and borne the brunt of many oppressive policies, many more oppressive public policies than beneficial. Even the ones that are supposed to be beneficial, whether it is welfare or school policy, somehow ends up having a disproportionate negative impact on people who are not white. And in New York, the the contrast between the haves and the have-nots is very acute. And where the have-nots are is also where this layer upon layer of divestment and kind of a lack of a comprehensive community health plan really show themselves. So you and I have talked about what can harm reduction bring to these communities. And while we know now, in the time that we're in with this opioid crisis, because it's not New York's first opioid crisis, how do we keep people alive? And how do we keep people engaged in systems of care that keep them connected and improve their health and wellness, right? And so that means that overdose prevention centers, syringe exchange programs, methadone programs, OTPs, all of these are part of a whole array of services that ought to be available on demand, non-stigmatized, but in and of themselves, they're not sufficient, right? And so we have to figure out how to create what either you call it a continuum of care, or I like to talk about the no wrong door continuum. So no matter what state you're in, the door that you enter addresses what you need first, right? Or what you say you need. And if you come in and you say you need a shower and you're still using, I want to give you that shower. I want to give you clean clothes. I want to give you food, and I want to give you safe supplies, right? And I want you to come back, because this is all about relationship building. This is all about trust. This is all about what the safety net ought to be providing. And I just want to say this before I turn it back over to you, that we talk about COVID and we talk about the impact of COVID, and we saw that the overdose death rates just skyrocketed during COVID. And so there's still a lot of speculation about why that was so, but we need to talk about what we lost in COVID. Someone sent me an article about the invisible poverty, or the invisible of homelessness. The safety net that we have or had before COVID was unseen, but it was there. And it served the people most alienated from the systems, in particular people with serious mental illness, people who are using drugs, people whose lives are unstable. And so that safety net that your average New Yorker doesn't see, doesn't know exists, was what existed before COVID. COVID shredded all of that. And so it's kind of frustrating, but also in some ways understandable that people don't understand why they're seeing more drug use in the streets, more people decompensating, more crimes, property crimes. They don't see what they never saw, which is that there was a low threshold, ongoing, person to person safety net for people whose lives don't allow them to be in the systems that we demand they comply with. So I want to keep that in mind because we are going to feel the effects of what COVID destroyed for a while. We are not post COVID by a long shot, particularly as it pertains to people who use drugs and who are at risk of overdose.
Yeah, you said so much, Tracy, and all of it I agree with. We've done our own research on the impact of COVID and people who use specifically those that are accessing our services. But the one thing that I really want to kind of drill down on is you use language that I often use. I don't believe that, it is a continuum of care, right? And you move along a straight line because that is really typically not the way it works. There is no wrong door. And so I liken it to a circle, right? However you come in, you can move along that circle. And for me, what's important about that is we talk about the coexistence of harm reduction and recovery is exactly what you said. Having that safety net within that circular space for people to move through how they define it. And I think that, as we look at the different systems, right, we look at treatment, prevention, recovery, harm reduction. Really, harm reduction and recovery offer the broadest spectrum for individuals to one, define what that means for themselves, and then to decide for themselves how to actualize what that definition is that they have created. And so I love what the commissioner said in terms of creating person-centered language, but we need to empower the people who are using our services to create for themselves what that definition is and what it looks like. And so I think that we have an opportunity here as we are, many of us at the table are thought leaders, we are informing policies. And so, in that privilege, because this is a privilege, and the privilege for us to do that, we can look at a framework such as the recovery capital framework to help measure because we have to understand the impacts of our policies on people, right? So is it positively or negatively impacting them? So we can use a recovery capital framework to measure how someone is circling through that door that they came. So has there been, an improvement to their family connections? Maybe that is what harm reduction or recovery means. Can we support them in that definition through a parenting skills class in a recovery center? Maybe it's, I want to get back to work. And that work doesn't always have to mean I want to be a peer, right? It is. Thank you for shaking your head on that because um, I find it a little bit frustrating that we are defining all people who have defined themselves as being in recovery as a peer in the workforce. And so, yes, I'm a peer, but I'm also an executive director. I know peers that are doctors. I know peers that are lawyers. And so, how do we open up and empower people to go back to what their passions are? And so that's something that I would like to see us do with the political power that we have to help with those political determinants of health. But, harm reduction and the coexistence of recovery can simply mean I don't want to use a safe consumption site today, and I want to be in a safe space today. And so I'm going to go to a recovery center because I know that it is non judgmental. I know that I may get connected to housing or housing support or to an OTP if I'm ready. I know that I can be in there and work on my passions. And I'm really talking about this from the perspective of someone who uses my space. And so that's what you're hearing in the excitement of it. I have a gentleman that comes here every day and who shared with me, and I'm honored that he shared with me that he still uses. But he said, when I am here, I am safe, I am not using, I am working on my passion to create baby shoes, by the way, and he shared that work with us. And so that is the coexistence of these two systems.
And I think that that is so. And I see one of my favorite folks, I call her Dr. Lori, that talked about we as a people who are nonlinear, who think more in terms of the wholeness, are always being asked to conform to a linear system. And many could say, and it's true, that an imposition of a linear system is part of the it's part of the systemic racism. It's part of the white supremacy to demand that you come to us and we tell you what to do. And so, what I definitely was very excited in hearing about, I've always been excited about the Recovery Center and how it would look for Black and Brown communities. I saw how it started to evolve in places like Long Island and Staten Island. And it was very much about families and parents and people who were in recovery, in abstinence-based recovery, and the creating the not just the supportive service, but the supportive surroundings, right, that welcomed you. Because I firmly believe that recovery, particularly for people who've come out of chaotic drug use, recovery is about a long stabilization and a long reintegration, not just back into the life that you weren't participating in when you were actively using, but a whole way of operating that acknowledges how you need to care for yourself, right? And so the very environment that you talk about that I know exists at your program, it has also the same elements in the Overdose Prevention Center. And that idea, we are at a turning point, and this is what the recovery community, I think, is primed to understand the nuances of, is that people who use are not incapacitated in their ability to make decisions and to know what's good for them. Moreover, if you design programming that is informed by the experiences of people who use, right? Because it's not about being in recovery one day and then the next day you use a substance and you're not in recovery anymore. You don't lose that recovery capital. It's in you. And so we need to design these kinds of programs based on the experiences of people who live this, right? And not just once. We need to keep on, right? Our quality assurance, if you will. We need to keep infusing what we provide for people who use drugs, for people who have used drugs, for their array of decisions, because there is so much, whether you want to talk about the beginning of chattel slavery or even not so long ago with the beginning of the war on drugs, that there was a purposeful propaganda put forward about who used drugs and who needed to be criminalized and what behaviors needed to be criminalized, right? And so I grew up in HIV and AIDS, right? I came to New York in 1989 to do AIDS work. And I never forget that harm reduction was the strategy undertaken because the health system and the addiction treatment system basically left people who were injecting to die. That was the way implicitly that the HIV problem or the Hep C problem among people who use drugs and their partners was going to be resolved. Their actions basically affirmed that. And so harm reduction was about addressing that void and that indifference and saying You cannot get well. You cannot recover if you're dead. We are going to deal with what's first, what will kill you first. And so that, to me, cannot be forgotten. Harm reduction isn't just an ethos, but it was a strategy that put a value on the lives of people who are doing things that society doesn't like. It shouldn't matter what society likes if it's about keeping people well. And, what society doesn't like manifests as NIMBY, manifests as bad policies, manifests as all kinds of things. But we are at a point now where the system to address people who use drugs and the dangers that can come with that need to be based in what the people who are utilizing the services need. And I can tell you, having been in the rooms of leadership of addiction treatment programs in the last 20, 30 years, that that consideration was never on the table. It was provider driven, and it was also driven by the leadership's philosophy about how you get clean, how you get sober, how you what fellowships that you enter into that will support that. And we've come into a new day and age. Our leadership, in order for us to begin to address what we're looking at, needs to be driven and informed by the people who are using this, the people who are using substances, the people who need the recovery supports, the people who need the OPCs, the people who are doing the syringe exchange programs and other street outreach.
So I am really glad you said that, and I could not wait to jump in, because in the research that I collected, I had a very pointed question. And the question that I asked the participants were, if I could be your voice at the tables where political decisions are being made, what would you want me to say? And if I could just have a little bit of space to use their voices, because that was the perfect tee up for this. There was a woman named Frida that said, none of us needs to suffer. Please tell Albany that we are all human beings. I was asked by Bruce to say, tell policymakers to look at the ramifications of policies on our second and third generation of children. Until we are in positions of power, nothing will change. We've been left behind, Solomon said, economically, in the media, educationally, legally, and politically. And we need the government to focus on those areas to help build for our people and to help us do that. And the last one I'll read is that, tell them, meaning the government, we want preventive measures so we don't have to heal, because more of us have been prevented from the illness in the first place. And that really speaks to mitigating some of the structural racism that we began this conversation talking about.
That's right. And that we talk about upstream, right? That we understand, but it's not one size fits all. And it's not one strategy or one policy that's going to address people's risk for drug use. We've often heard when, when I was a kid, I didn't dream of using substances. I didn't dream of being involved in the Child Protective Services system and losing custody of my children. And I dreamed to be the first Black Supreme Court judge, woman Supreme Court judge, and glad somebody else made it. But the point is that in my chaotic drug use, I know that I had both privilege and I was both oppressed. I was seen by the family care Child Protective Services system as a enemy or a threat to my children simply because I was in treatment. And so these are these kinds of decouplings that we have to do, because taking my children away did not expedite my getting well. I was very privileged in being able to have a job and benefits that supported what my children and I needed, but that was not provided by Child Protective Services. What I got from Child Protective Services was destruction. So, and so this idea of these systems that don't heal, they actually patch people back together just enough for them to leave and then come back, whether through the emergency room, whether through shelters, whether through jail, corrections. But we need to demand systems that speak to wholeness and wellness. And that means the silos of addiction treatment, the silos of recovery, the silos of prevention can no longer be sustained, right? And harm reduction is an effort to bridge the silos. But if we remain hung up on the behavior of people, i.e., if we remain hung up that people are not redeemable unless they stop using, unless they are abstinent. And we know that abstinence only approaches don't work. We know it for abstinence only approaches don't work for people who have needs that they try to meet in any way they can. We knew it about sex education. We know it about diabetes management. We know it about a whole host of things. That's why I don't even use the term behavioral health, because if we're going to talk about behavioral health, then we need to talk about diet, food. We need to talk about smoking. We need to put all of that in there. But behavioral health is a term that blames the people with the health issues of the mind. I call them health issues of the mind, and that we don't have systems that treat health issues of the mind, and they don't acknowledge that those minds are in the bodies that they're treating, for which they get a lot of money to treat, right? So that's the other thing, talking about follow the dollars. And the dollars have generally gone toward the physical side. The dollars have generally been difficult to access for, again, these health issues of the mind. We have a whole insurance industry built on denying care for people with health issues of the mind. We're also denying care for people with health issues with bodily health issues. But when we talk about mental health and addiction, when we talk about parity, we're talking about an inherent discriminatory policy toward people who have health issues with their mind. And that is a great deal of work of what Legal Action Center is focused on, which is the rights of people who use drugs, the rights of people who have used drugs or are in recovery, the rights of people who use medications to address their addiction or their substance use disorder history. And then we also talk about the rights of people to get quality health care, no matter what they use, right? Their right to be treated with respect and compassion in health systems, and that they don't deserve any less because they're using a substance, whether illicit or legal.
I think we could do this all day long. And I think that we should do this again. I don't know if we are over time. Dr. Smith Wilson is chuckling because she knows.
You guys will get this. I had a hook. I had the hook out a long time, but I will say that Jennifer, who is the behind the scenes, she was like, I am digging this conversation every step of the way. So she was ignoring my hook, and I'm like, hello, the hook, the hook, the hook. But oh my gosh, ladies, oh my gosh, I I'm always going to be cheerleaders of Felicia and Tracy. So thank you so much for always taking care of what needs to be taken care of. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Thank you so much. So now, guys, we're going to continue this program, but I am going to turn it over. I actually get the hook. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Ben Riker, who will lead the second half of our harm reduction day of action. So Ben will come up and introduce our next speakers and just keep this ball rolling. I'm passing it to you, Ben.
Thanks, Angelia. It is fantastic to be here, and I can't I can't even kind of share accurately how lucky I feel every time that I get to share space with Dr. Felicia. And I say this, I get the opportunity to say this a lot because recently I've got to spend a lot of time with Felicia, and every time I am just blown away. And Tracy as well. Every time I get the opportunity to share space with you, I appreciate both of your perspectives so much. I appreciate both of your expertise so much. And I'm getting a text from Felicia right now, and I love you too, and I appreciate I appreciate you. I'm not actually sure, Jen. I don't have the schedule in front of me. I'm not actually sure who I'm introducing next. I didn't see it in my inbox. I know there were some changes. Could you just send me a quick message? Thank you. And I did know this. I guess I'm just slacking. I have the pleasure of introducing another person who I have so much respect for the work that this person does, respect for the dedication that this person has. And again, another person with the direct lived experience. I cannot, day in and day out, I cannot, our community values people with direct lived experience. We value people who have been there and done that and have navigated these systems successfully and get to share that, that their process strategically with the people who need it most. So I'd like to welcome my friend, Luis. Mr. LeBoy, what's shaking, brother?
Good morning, Ben. Peace and blessings to you. Really good to see you. You're doing a lot of wonderful stuff. You're amazing. And I appreciate that as well. Thank you, Ben. Good morning, beautiful people. My name is Louis LeBoy, a person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that for 24 years, I have not used any drugs. I stopped eating out of garbage cans. I've maintained a stable housing. I've developed a career, as well as a strong support network with the guidance from the Department of Corrections, Community Supervision, Narcotics Anonymous, a higher power, and Oasis. I'm an alumnus of Phoenix House and a certified recovery peer advocate. I am truly honored to be here today with so many of you that care about our marginalized and vulnerable communities suffering from the horrors of addiction. I extend my deepest appreciation to all the viewers, the panelists, Ms. Gardner, Dr. P, amazing, the commissioner, the New York State Alumni Association, the Bronx Council on Alcohol and Substance Use Disorders, Acacia Networks, South Bronx Opioid Impact Collaborative, the Citywide Addiction Support Network, Friends of Recovery New York, ASAP, Harm Reduction's steering committee, like Joe Turner, the dishwasher at Exponents. It's amazing. ASAP's New York Certification Board, as well as OASAS and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for your relentlessness, your efforts to advocate, educate, inform, and support our need to implement harm reduction as part of the continuum of care. We know it is not a simple task to get buy-in from some community members who want to continue the criminalization of addiction and providers that are focused on absolute abstinence from all drugs, including medication-supported recovery. Let me tell you about a personal experience. In my 9 years in treatment, I experienced a lot of stigma as well as a lack of support when I proudly reduced my drug use to a minimum. I reduced my use from 3 bags a day to 1 bag a day. And when I was found out, I was chastised by my counselor for having a dirty and remanded to detox yet again after more than 20 detoxifications and failed attempts at recovery. I really wanted to stop using. I just didn't know how. I finally made a commitment to stop using during incarceration and a harsh solitary confinement. The pain had finally outweighed the pleasure of using. I woke up aware of my surroundings in a maximum security prison called Elmira and obsessed with prayer for God to give me one last chance to learn how to stay clean and stay out of prison. I was transferred to Phoenix House KSAT program in the Mid-State Correctional Facility. It was a life-saving transition for me. That's where I established a strong foundation, commitment, confidence, and guidance to practice the principles of Narcotics Anonymous and eventually developed a recovery-oriented support network that I continue to develop, expand, and utilize today. I thank Mitch Rosenthal, the founder of Phoenix House. And now let me tell you about my professional experience. I'm a KSAC for over 20 years now. It took me a long time to internalize the importance of harm reduction interventions, even longer to let go of my self-stigmatization, as well as my stance on zero tolerance for the drug use of others in treatment. Eventually, I became open-minded to the positive outcomes and miracles in educating consumers on how to use less, and use safely, saving lives and empowering them to become self-sufficient and independent. One great catalyst for me has been the OASIS prevention framework that is geared towards reducing and prevention of drug abuse for children, adolescents, and young adults by identifying risk and protective factors to promote health and reduce problem behavior. So, for example, during our outreach, we operationalized this concept with the OASIS framework to focus on safely outreaching these consumers in the hotspots, like the hub area in the South Bronx and Central Harlem, using harm reduction and motivational interviewing techniques. We meet the people where they are at with warmth and empathy. We engage, assess, and intervene with education on the use of naloxone, as well as fentanyl test strips, syringe waste disposal, connections to any resource they may want that will support them into making the slightest change in their behavior, including how to access all levels of care, overdose prevention centers, medication-assisted treatment, and much needed love and attention. We must look at harm reduction as part of the continuum of care. Addressing addiction treatment and supports begins with harm reduction, continues with harm reduction, and ends with harm reduction. Harm reduction is for everyone that is affected by the horrors of addiction. It is a major catalyst to prevention, treatment, and recovery. Harm reduction techniques can be used at any point of contact to plant a seed of hope, recovery, change, improvement, growth, always striving towards improved health and increased safety for everyone. Let's think out of the box. Let's think out of the box. Fund harm reduction programs and overdose prevention centers. Let's develop a system for fiscal viability, like implementing billing services for the providers, and go beyond just being harm reduction techniques. Make them an official funded part of the continuum of service provision as a modality of treatment. Imagine we can implement peers into these harm reduction centers. Harm reduction is reduced pain, anguish, and increase in love for humanity. Harm reduction is a basic human right for everyone. And with that, I'm Louis LeBoy, Director of Addiction Services at Emma L. Bowen Community Service Center, located at 1727 Amsterdam Avenue on Sugar Hill. And with that, blessings to everyone. And thank you very much for everyone that has shared so far. Ben, you're amazing. Thank you for having me.
Louis, thank you so much, brother. Twice you said love, and and in between those two times that you said the word love, uh, you were describing compassionate alternatives that I didn't, as a person in active use, didn't have the opportunity to use. Right, these were things that, for the most part, for the time that I was in active addiction, were non-existent, and in fact, were really not even kind of a thought on most folks in the treatment communities that I was a part of. They weren't even options, right? So the work that you do, I had the pleasure again of visiting your spot last year, and just the sheer amount of people walking through your doors, and coming out of your doors with smiles on their faces, and the community partners that I got to meet. Uh, I'm proud to be your friend. I'm proud to be a member of the recovery community with you. I'm proud of the work that you do, and I just appreciate you. So thanks so much. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Ben. Come to the next health fair, September 16th.
It's on the schedule, man. We'll be
No,
there.
you're courageous to come down here. I appreciate it.
All right, Louis. Thanks again.
Thank you. Peace and blessings, everyone.
So up next, we have really one of my new friends. We have actually, why don't we just bring Brenda up? Brenda Harris Collins, and I'll let you introduce yourself. But first, I just want to share with you, which I hope I've shared before, but also with everybody who's watching, that we have such an incredible ally in Brenda. Brenda has, I know what your schedule looks like. I know that your days are must be on the verge of being overwhelming, but you always make time for us, for the recovery community. The language that you use in the spaces that you visit with us is so hopeful, and it makes us so optimistic. The feedback that our RCO network and our RCOC network that comes back to me in regards to you is always it's incredible. So I know you're new in your current position. We are thrilled, and I want to thank you on behalf of the recovery community for being such an incredible ally, and for listening and showing up. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Ben. It is such a privilege to be here at this Harm Reduction Day of Action, and to be the ally, and to be able to share with you all today where we see the recovery community really, and encouraging the recovery community to stand up and to advocate for the things that are needed in this day and age and time that we're in. I just want to shout out to Dr. Smith Wilson and to Albert Aponte. I thank you for New York, and I thank you to the Alumni Association of New York State for doing this. There was a cry that, as Oasis is educating providers to move in the direction of harm reduction, that it is so important to bring the persons that are impacted, that persons that are identify that they are in recovery. Nothing should be done for us without us is something that we really want to acknowledge. And so it is important that we not only just look at providers, but we also look at persons in recovery, how whatever we are developing and moving towards, that you are brought into the process. And so I'm just grateful to be here, being a part of the Recovery Bureau of New York State Oasis. I've been a part of that Recovery Bureau since 2007. So I'm not new to the Recovery Bureau. I may be in a new position, but this is my passion. This is what I do. And so just want to acknowledge all that have come ahead of me. Dr. Felicia Pullum, Tracy Gardner, Albert Aponte, Louis LeBoy. I've just been so impacted by all that has been said today. I recognize that we are in a time of epidemic, and we need to utilize every tool that we have. When we talk about medical issues, we never debate harm reduction with how we address certain medical issues. We don't stigmatize individuals who have diabetes or high blood pressure, and doctors don't say we're not going to treat you anymore, we're not going to do those things. So it is important that as we move forward and we're trying to find ways to save lives, that we acknowledge harm reduction as a pathway to recovery. One of the things that I am a very staunch believer in is the recovery-oriented system of care. And the way that I look at and define the recovery-oriented system of care is that recovery is the umbrella, and underneath the umbrella is prevention, treatment, and recovery support services and harm reduction. Harm reduction is just one of the pathways that individuals choose to go to lead them into recovery. And ROSC honors all pathways to recovery. So some individuals will never see a treatment program. Some individuals may have something called natural recovery. Some individuals may have the correction facility may help them get into recovery. It may be their physician. It may, however, a person, faith is a pathway to recovery, and harm reduction is just another pathway that can be utilized to recovery. And to be honest, many people use multiple pathways to recovery. So when someone is sharing their recovery story, they may start at a certain point, but they may not emphasize. And I think that that's also giving voice. So a lot of individuals only talk about their treatment process, but don't share their harm reduction process as a part of their initiation into recovery. And so it's giving a voice to this, having you to share your entire story, not just a portion of your story, but really acknowledging the pathway that the multiple pathways that may have been chosen. One of the things that we know that individuals, especially women of color, may choose treatment as a pathway to initiate their recovery process, but it is faith that they utilize to sustain their recovery. And so if we know that, and that people may choose an initial initiation pathway, we need to encourage all individuals to choose the pathway that is best for them. We want to meet people where they're at. Recovery-oriented systems of care, as was talked about, talks about no wrong door. Wherever you are at, we need to meet you there. We need to find ways to mitigate the risk of overdoses and save lives. So whatever pathway, wherever you come in at, what do we have there waiting for you to help? And one of the other things about recovery is self-directed. Individuals know what they need for themselves. And recovery is about choice and how you choose to actualize your recovery process. So it is really important that we look at that and look at and acknowledge all pathways, and reducing stigma is critical. Recovery-oriented systems of care is specifically also looking at how can we reduce the stigma around individuals that use substances. And so we want to reduce that stigma. We want to look at that. And so coming back into the Recovery Bureau, we really are looking at as we support Dr. Chinazo Cunningham and her efforts around as a priority around harm reduction. The Recovery Bureau is looking at what are the things that we need to do, and the recovery centers are doing it. So I just want to say that the work is already being done. We may not recognize it. We may not call it harm reduction. People call it various things, but the work is already being done. And so our recovery centers have already started a lot of the work. That we have been, one of the recovery centers has a Narcan vending machine. We're looking at how the other recovery centers can do something similar. We're looking at recovery centers that are doing the work, that are out in the streets doing, passing out overdose prevention kits, Narcan and fentanyl test strips. We're looking at the recovery centers that are doing that. One of the things that I have been looking at since I've come back into my position in April is really looking at New York State overall and how we have really looked at recovery. So I want to say, I want to acknowledge that this is about 15 years since, I think 2022 is 15 years since the Recovery Bureau has been developed. And in this time, we have done a tremendous amount of work, and we really have done a lot of work in building recovery and sustaining recovery. But I think it is time now for us to really focus on pre-recovery. Pre-recovery looks at the stages of change, where we are looking at those who are in contemplation, pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation. And what are the services that we need to really emphasize in that area? So this is something that we're committed to really building in our work on this, and looking at the stages of change and how we can meet people. We're looking at other states and some of the things that they have done, but we know that New York State is a leader in recovery movement, and so we want to continue the work that is being done. When I first started the recovery with the Recovery Bureau, we were able to go to other states, and it was very difficult for me because I worked in a therapeutic community for 20 years, and in that therapeutic community, it was abstinence-based, and so I had to really transform my thinking. And we went to Philadelphia, and they took us to a provider. And in the beginning, many of the staff that were with us said, why would they present this particular young woman to present to us? And it was a young lady who presented to us and shared with us that she was in recovery. But she had not stopped using substances. She had stopped using crack, but she was still continuing to use substances. But her life had changed. Her life was improving. She had her children that were taken away from her, but now she had her children back. She was attending the program that she was at. She was getting the help that needed. She was feeling better about herself and her future. And so many of us said, well, why would they put her in front? But it was to acknowledge that if she said that she was in recovery and her life was improving, that we needed to acknowledge her and needed to understand that she is in recovery. And so many times we want to define what a person is in recovery, but that person defines when they're in recovery and where they're at in their process and what they need to do. And so we want to recognize I want to first of all recognize all of those that are in recovery and long-term recovery that are on today. I want to recognize all of the pathways that you have taken to recovery, whether it's mutual aid group, whether it's treatment, whether harm reduction was your pathway, medication assisted treatment is your path, whatever the pathway is, we want to acknowledge you today for standing up today, coming on this. And one of the things that I want to encourage is that things cannot change if you don't stand up and speak and be a voice for what is needed, and moving towards harm reduction and accepting people where they are at. So we're looking for that. I just also want to acknowledge the Alumni Association of New York State, to say that they are leaders in this movement for persons in recovery. The last couple of months have been a focus on this. If you want to come and learn about harm reduction and the impact on persons in recovery, come on. They meet the fourth Thursday of every month, and take a part in that. You will see and benefited from understanding, having understanding, knowledge of what this is all about. Harm reduction term can be utilized in many ways, but understanding what this means for the recovery community is so important. One of the things that we talked about when we first started Recovery Bureau and started doing some work is that you need to get on the train. But I want to say that the train is moving and we need everyone on board. It has already taken off, and come on and join in with us. Being informed is the key, and continue to work towards understanding more of what is needed and how you can support this Harm Reduction Day of Action. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brenda. You just like absolutely illustrated the comments that I made when you joined. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your perspective, your support, and your willingness to always make time for us, and your prioritizing of the voices of those of us in the recovery community, the voices of those of us who are still using drugs, the voices of those of us with criminal justice experience. Just so appreciated. And we're lucky to have you in the position that you're in. So thanks.
Thank you.
So next up, we have a couple of peers joining us, and I'm really excited. Another person that always says yes, joining us, Anita Kennedy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Ben for New York for this amazing platform to speak about harm reduction. As Ben said, my name is Anita Kennedy, and I'm a peer engagement specialist in East Harlem, working at Mount Sinai Beth Israel. I've been asked to speak with you today about a harm reduction success story. I've been in my current position at Mount Sinai Beth Israel for almost 6 years now. Being a peer, I know the importance of meeting people where they're at, being consistent, and most important, to gain the trust of someone I'm working with, to be honest. I truly love the work that I do, so I really enjoy doing the street outreach aspect of my job. I met a young man on 125th Street while doing outreach and asked what I typically ask everybody when I first meet them. Is there anything that I can help you with? The first few meetings, the answer was always the same. No, you cannot help me. So there were some other people that were standing around, and I had previously assisted them with detox, rehab, that kind of thing, going to outpatient. And they encouraged him by telling him that I'd helped them previously. And I heard something that I hear many times from people that I worked with. It's okay. She's cool. She's one of us. So that was encouraging. And he finally gave in. The first couple of times we talked, he asked for food and clothing, some, very simple requests. But they were really important to him. So I took him to what was then NYRE. It's now On Point NYC, where the Overdose Prevention Center is. And I have the pleasure of working in this neighborhood and being able to access that often. So it's a huge benefit to have that around. So I took him to NYRE for a shower and some clean clothes. I used my lived experience to kind of guide our conversations. And at one point, he started talking to me about drinking and substance use. I've always listened and allowed him to set the pace of our conversations. Once he reported that he had overdosed and he was afraid that it would happen again. I gave him fentanyl test strips and we spoke about how to use them. I trained him with a Narcan kit, and then he later reported using that to reverse an overdose for somebody else. And that was kind of a turning point for him because he realized how he felt when he helped the other person, and also he saw how closely it came to the person not making it through the overdose. So that was a big turning point. At that point, he asked me about detox, and I was able to escort him to detox at Mount Sinai Beth Israel. So I'm not sure what had happened earlier in the day. Apparently, he had used some substances, and I met him at the detox to kind of, go in and just to help him, to reassure him that everything would be okay. And he went into the restroom and he overdosed in the restroom. And it took many doses to reverse the overdose, and he made it. He was in ICU for many days, and then when he got out of the ICU, he went to detox. And he didn't stop there. He didn't want to leave the hospital at that time. He said that after the detox, he really wanted to go to the rehab. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they gave him close to 28 days, which most of you know is almost unheard of. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. So at that time, we spoke to him about buprenorphine. I was still in contact with him. The counselors, everybody spoke to him about buprenorphine and the other MAT medications that he could use. And he chose the Suboxone or buprenorphine. And he completed outpatient rehab after that, and reunited with his family, which was really big because his mother had all but written him off, and as well as other family members. And she was really amazed at the transformation. I remember talking to her, and she said, "I've got my son back." He went on to college and graduated, and he has been working now for the past 4 years without any reoccurrences. So during all of our meetings, I made it clear that I was not judging him at all. We took all of our, all the time that I spoke with him and everything, we spoke just about anything that he wanted to speak about. I let him guide the conversation, and I told him I understand how difficult this could be. I used my lived experience to let him know that I truly understand what's going on, and that was reassuring for him to have somebody to speak to that really understands what's going on. um, you know, he knew at all times that he was in control. And, I'm just very thankful that we have harm reduction as a pathway for recovery. So thank you very much. And Ben, it's back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. I appreciate you sharing that story with us. I mean, what a perfect illustration of how harm reduction can really open doors to meeting folks. Those social determinants of health that aren't necessarily met in clinical treatment settings, right? We have the opportunity to engage, and where that leads quite often is pretty amazing. So I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
Take care. So next up, we have someone who I've actually not met, Arthur. If you want to jump on. Hi, Arthur.
Good morning.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Ben.
So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I do want to tell you that we appreciate your time and your willingness to share your work with us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. I could tell on my harm reduction, my story itself. Let's go back to 2019 when I was in prison at Mid-State Correctional Facility. I was there for 1 year and 4 months. I got out in 2020. And when I got out, I actually did use again, briefly, but I ended up coming down to Ed Thompson's Veterans Center down in Queens, and I've been there since March of 2015. And I started using Vivitrol, which at the time I didn't even know was part of harm reduction until I, did more research on it. As far as what it does for me, I have not had any urges since then. I waited a year to apply for a position. I went through the recovery coach class that we have right now. And so far, I did the internship, and now I'm currently working at the Samaritan Daytop Village as a peer worker, KSAN, the City Addicted Statewide Network, and HCBS, the Home Care Based Services. All I can say so far is that if I had not used the harm reduction, I probably would be drinking again. It takes away all the urges that I've ever had. I don't have any cravings. And as a success story, I mean, within a year in prison, I'm now working. I can't say so much more that it has helped me dramatically as a success. I'm not sure what else I could say about it, except that if it wasn't for the harm reduction, and I know it helps other people because I see it at Ed Thompson's, I wouldn't be here. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody else.
Thanks so much, Arthur, for sharing your personal story. And, I just want to take this opportunity, kind of before you jump off, to acknowledge how recent, your recovery journey began. And I'm also a person who entered the recovery workforce in very early recovery, sort of to the dismay of some folks around me, right? What does this person with so little, quote unquote, clean time, right, have to offer? Is it safe for this person to spend time with somebody else who may be actively using? And I think you're a perfect example of, you dispel those myths, I think, like I did. Our lived experience, specifically in early recovery, can be incredibly valuable to the next person because it's so fresh, right? Our experience inside the criminal justice system, our experience with medication-supported recovery, our experience, what it's like to walk for the first time into a mutual aid meeting alone. Those things are really fresh, and those for the folks who give those of us in very early recovery the opportunity to strategically share our lived experience and be of value. It's incredible. And today my job is also part of my own recovery pathway, right? It's part of it gives me, it's one of those service pieces that we know is so valuable. So thank you so much, Arthur. Really appreciate you jumping on short notice and sharing your story and the work that you do.
Again, thank you for the opportunity, and I guess have a good day.
You too. So I guess we have a few minutes left, and there's a few things that I appreciate. So many comments from Felicia and Tracy and Brenda and the commissioner and Lewis. There's a few things that folks brought up that I want to just sort of touch on. The first being, I guess, some of those compassionate alternatives that Lewis spoke about. And also, I suppose everybody spoke about. We talk about harm reduction practices and strategies quite a lot. And I think this big piece of harm reduction that we don't necessarily talk about is the educational component. And so much of the success of harm reduction and the stigma that still surrounds harm reduction is based on how well we as a recovery community are teaching up. How well are we communicating why harm reduction is not enabling, why harm reduction is there's value in harm reduction strategies, how harm reduction impacts systems, right? How harm reduction impacts individuals. So we have an obligation, and I think we have almost an ethical responsibility as folks who understand harm reduction, as folks like myself who practiced a program of harm reduction and landed in practicing a program of abstinence eventually. So I would just encourage everyone, when you have the opportunity to teach up, to teach up. And I shared this on a meeting a couple of weeks ago, but there was Friends of Recovery Delaware Otsego, which is I live in Oneonta. It's my local recovery community and outreach center. Got the first, I believe, the first naloxone vending machine in the state. So incredible, right? And there was an article in our local paper sort of celebrating the fact, and it was posted to Facebook. And by the time I saw the Facebook post, it had been up for maybe 2.5 hours, and there was something along the lines of 250 or 300 comments. It was one of the most traumatic experiences for me scrolling through the comments section. The recognition that I and many of the people that I get to spend my days with, we exist sometimes in somewhat of a vacuum. We do so much work, and I did so much work before this job in my community. So much outreach work and community education work, and speaking at schools and speaking with the Chamber of Commerce and speaking at the hospital, and I made the assumption that our progress in my community was farther along than it actually was. The absolute inhumane commentary that followed this incredible article highlighting this one harm reduction program that my community is lucky enough to have was really, really appalling. The devaluation of our lives. So I say that to say that as we're making our way through our communities, as we're in the line at the grocery store, as we are at the library, or coming in and out of our outpatient programs, whatever it is, the responsibility, unfortunately, falls on us, on all of us, on the recovery community, to be those educators, to share our lived experience when we feel comfortable, to share our stories. We at For New York, we're a 501c3. We don't get to throw money at our legislators and ask for things that we want. We get to lobby decision makers with our stories, and I get to share my story, and I get to share your stories, and that's where our capital is. So that being said, I would encourage folks to share their harm reduction success stories, like Arthur and Anita were kind enough to do. I would encourage us to share what we learned from Felicia and from Tracy today. We get to leave this meeting with some knowledge that maybe we didn't have before we got here, and we can now go out into the world and we can share their powerful messages. We can share the services that Lewis and his organization provide when we see someone in need. As a recovery community, I hope we prioritize folks' lived experience as an asset, as an incredible asset. And I don't know that we have done a good enough job as in the peer professional world of bringing those people, like Tracy said, who use drugs into the conversation. Who is the expert? The person who uses drugs. Those people whose lives are improving. Those people who whose lives have improved. However, they may not be practicing a program of abstinence. And I've shared this with lots of people. I have many, many people in my life today who haven't used opiates or opioids in a decade, yet they have a glass of wine on Sunday or they use cannabis. Those folks were and have been really excluded from the recovery community, and their journey towards wellness was a very, very lonely journey. And I had a similar experience as a person who started my recovery process not abstinent from all substances. And I hope that as a community, we can rally around those folks. I also hope and love those folks. I also hope that as a community, for those of us who have the opportunity to share our opinions about our organization's hiring practices, that we can employ those people who are practicing a successful program of moderation management, those people who are practicing a program that includes medication-supported recovery. Those folks are of incredible value to that person walking in the door. So I hope that we can make space for them, not only within our mutual aid groups, but professionally, because the value and expertise and knowledge is second to none. I'm a person who came through many clinical treatment programs. I'm a person who was never once in 15 or 16 or 17 years honest with a clinician in any of those programs. I was honest the first time I connected with a peer professional, which I didn't even know existed until I came home to my own community where I grew up. What else can we do? We can acknowledge that clinical services are valuable, that detox beds are valuable, that that my last treatment experience gave me the time and space away from some of those triggering situations that I needed. However, I did not have any of, again, those social determinants of health that allow me today to be a person that practices a program of abstinence and a person whose life has improved. I didn't get any of those social determinants addressed in any of those 28 days programs. So the recovery continuum is extraordinarily important. We should be reaching out to and I've had some conversation. I see Bill Doyle's on. I've had so many conversations with a lot of you folks about, where are the referrals from our treatment centers coming from? That referral back to my recovery community and outreach center, I credit with my sustained recovery and my move from practicing a harm reduction program to again, that nonlinear experience that was my life, that circular, as Felicia kind of described, that circular experience that I'd had for the better part of 2 decades. So as folks, as professionals, as members of the recovery community, we can be calling our recovery centers. We can be stopping by and making sure that we let them know we're here and that we're valuable and that recovery support services are valuable. I guess the last thing I would just mention, I will be sending out an email to everybody who's registered, and probably out to the larger community. There's a couple of bills. The legislature is not in session right now, but there are a couple of bills that didn't make it out of committee that we had hoped would move a little farther last session. It's important that we contact our representatives and let them know where we stand on them. Both are Rivera bills. The two that I'm going to highlight, and I'm sure there's others. There's a buprenorphine decrim bill. It's S 2524. It's sort of stuck in the codes committee. It's common sense bill. And I'll send out some more information, how you can access the text of that bill, how you can support that bill, and how you can contact your rep to support it. The second is S603, and that's the Safer Consumption Services Act. That's in the Health Committee. California, I believe, 2 weeks ago, passed a Safer Services Act, similar bill. We can do it. We can get it there. Again, teaching up. So in that follow-up email to this, I'll include, ways that you can contact your representatives, some messaging points that we can share. And I guess with that, I'm going to kick it back to Angelia.
Thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate you so much. You always keep us grounded. I'm a family member in recovery, and you keep us at the center with making sure that we keep individuals with lived experience voice at the center. So I'm grateful for you for always doing that. I want to thank everyone who participated today. As we wanted to do a level set about harm reduction. What does it mean? What does it look like in the community? How can recovery centers embrace harm reduction? How do recovery centers embrace harm reduction practices and principles? Have recovery centers been doing this, and what that has manifested itself into and what it has looked like? You have heard from our subject matter experts. You have heard from individuals with lived experience that have harm reduction integrated into their path to recovery and on recovery. And so one of the things that we use these days of actions for is to level set, is to make sure that there is a conversation that is being had around things that are having an impact on the recovery community, on the individuals with lived experience, on family members, on allies, champions, all of these individuals that touch addiction policy and help to expand and elevate addiction policy so that it truly wraps around individuals with lived experience and then continues to expand out to family services, to recovery high schools, to collegiate recovery, all of those things. So we hope that we have not failed you in our attempt at bringing you front and center harm reduction, so that you can go and continue to have these conversations amongst each other, practice a level of acceptance around harm reduction, and continue to kind of grow. Ben mentioned that he will be sending out an email where you will be called to activate, to learn more about harm reduction. If that is your pathway to educate others as they struggle with whether or not harm reduction is something that they can obtain, they can integrate into their practice, into their journey, their recovery journey. So if you have any questions, you can type them in. You can send it to info@for-ny.org. We will do our best to get those questions to individuals that spoke with you today. As For New York is not the expert in this, as For New York is always about bringing the voice of individuals with lived experience to the table so that you hear it directly from those individuals. We can certainly turn those questions around and make sure that we put the information in our weekly e-bulletin so that you have that information or get that information back directly to you via email. But as we come to a close to our day of action, it is not a stop to the conversation around harm reduction. We are very much aware that the conversation around harm reduction will continue to grow. As the commissioner said when she opened up this morning, with the introduction of the new Office of Harm Reduction, I am sure that there will be more conversations that will be needed to have, that the recovery community will have, that the recovery community will want to express their voice on. And so, as always, For New York would like to be your vehicle to collect those voices as you begin to voice those opinions, concerns, questions, roundtable discussions, whatever you need from For New York with regards to elevating the conversation of harm reduction and the recovery community, we are here to do it. So we thank you. And just for listening. And we also thank you in advance for being an active member. And by that, I mean, when you get the email from Ben, you activate and you learn more and you do more. So I just want to say on behalf of Friends of Recovery New York and the New York State Alumni Association and the Friends of Recovery Board of Directors, as well as the New York State Alumni Association Steering Committee, we thank you for spending some time with us this morning, learning all things harm reduction. Thank you.